Let's talk about detail questions. And I'm going to come out and say it, these are probably my least favorite kind of question. The reason why is there isn't much strategy you can use. All you're doing is finding a particular detail that the question is asking about in the passage. That's it. Now, to the extent that there is any strategy, I would say this. When you're looking for the correct answer, you want to look for something that paraphrases what the passage is saying. In other words, it's not an exact quote from the passage. The correct answer usually is not an exact quote. Usually it's a slightly altered version of the quote. Just keep that in mind. Some of the common stems you'll see here. What does the text indicate about X? Based on the text, the passage states. All right, let's take a look at this type of question. Pause the video, read the passage, and answer the question. What does the text indicate about sea urchins? This is a pretty straightforward question. And as I mentioned a minute ago, there's not a whole lot of strategy here, right? You just have to answer it. So let's go through these answer options and see which one does the trick. All right, answer option A. They are likely to continue their migration north. This is a prediction about what's going to happen in the future. They have migrated north because of the increased salinity caused by the rising temperatures, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But does the passage give any indication about what is going to happen in the future? It doesn't. Now, let me make a quick little aside here because this is an important point. You may know a thing or two about science, right? Like you may know that, for instance, scientists predict in the future temperatures are going to continue going up. But you can't bring that in as knowledge, right? You can't use that unless it's explicitly stated. So that is out. All right, they primarily subsist on a kelp diet. It's true that they eat kelp, but do they primarily eat kelp? What does primarily mean? It means more than anything else, or mostly. Now, does it say that they mostly eat kelp or primarily eat kelp? No, it says they commonly eat kelp, but primarily is a very strong word. I would say that's an example of an extreme word. We talked about extreme language on central idea questions. Remember that, right? So primarily, not quite what I'm looking for here. The warming temperature has had opposing effects on their well-being. Well, it doesn't explicitly say this, does it? It doesn't say that it's had opposing effects, but it does give one pro and one con. Right? The con is clearly that they are unable to thrive now that the water's saltier, right? And the pro is that they have more food to eat. They have more kelp to eat, right? So this is what the passage is saying, even if it's not saying it explicitly. And if you don't buy that, let's look at answer option D and maybe we can eliminate that. Sea urchins will always migrate when salinity increases. Big red flag. I do not like that type of word. Always is an extreme word. So answer option D is out. Correct answer here is C. Now, sometimes a detailed question will ask you about a passage with a chart or graph in it. And before we really dive into this one, let me talk a little strategically about these types of questions, these chart and graph questions. They have a pretty lousy payoff. What do I mean by that? Well, they're worth as much as any other question, right? They have the same point value as any other question, but you're probably going to be spending more time on them just by their very nature. You're not only going to have to read the passage like you usually do, you're also going to have to understand what the chart or graph is saying. And that takes time, even if the actual question ends up being somewhat straightforward. So my recommendation, unless you're very, very good at charts and graphs, is to skip these. At first, you can come back and try them later after you've done all the other questions, but my general recommendation for chart and graph questions is to skip them. Okay, so pause the video, read the passage and the chart, and then let's take a stab at this question. Which choice uses data from the table to most effectively support the researcher's conclusion? Now, before we get into this too much, I want to give you a little hack, and that is identifying trends. Very often, you can look at the trend line of the numbers in a particular chart or graph. So here we're going from 25 to 33, so that's going up. Here we go from 75 to 124 to 32, so that's kind of, I don't know, waggling a little bit, right? This goes from 199 up to 232, down to 201, again, wiggling a little bit. And this goes from 4.32 to 5.21 to 5.78, clearly going up. Sometimes just identifying that trend line is helpful. Okay, so let's look at these one by one. The more basic soil had shorter plants. Let's assess that. The basic soil does have shorter plants than the other soil, right? It's the plant height is the shortest here. So that part's good. And a higher number of parasites per plant. Well, no, right? The number of parasites per plant here is lower than this, but higher than that, right? It's not necessarily a higher number of parasites per plant, so that's out. Okay, the difference in lifespans between parasites in the acidic and basic soil, so we're comparing acidic to basic, the difference in lifespan, so from this lifespan to this lifespan, was more significant than the difference in the number of parasites. So we're comparing this to this. Well, how do you define significant? Is it the number, right? In which case this is not more significant. This is a distance of like 1.4 and this is a distance of 30. Are we talking about percent change? Also not as significant. So this one is not what we're looking for, right? The difference between the acidic and the basic for the average lifespan is not more significant than the difference in the number of parasites per plant. So that's out. Okay, the plants in the acidic soil were significantly taller than those in the neutral soil. Let's take that statement first. So the plants in the acidic soil were taller than those in the neutral soil. Yes, right? The acidic plants have an average height of 33. The neutral plants have an average height of 29. Okay, and the parasites weighed significantly more. Is that true? Well, no, right? 201 is not more than 232. So that's out. The number of parasites was maximized. Process of elimination. There's only one answer left, right? The number of parasites was maximized in the neutral soil. Yes, it looks like it, right? 124 compared to these other two. So that part's okay. While the plant height was maximized in acidic soil. Yes, right? We have our winner. Now, again, I want to stress, conceptually, this is not a very difficult passage, right? It's just about looking at numbers, but it takes time. And for that reason, I would suggest skipping these ones first and coming back to them later.